Hello and welcome to Arizona State University and the Center for Services Leadership. And today we have a webinar with Charlie Oliver from TECH 2025. First, just a few pieces of information about the center for those of you who are not familiar with us. The Center for Services Leadership is a group of faculty and industry members, and we have over 80 faculty network members worldwide, many of the leading researchers in the academy on the topic of services, and we have almost 50 member companies that are part of our network. And between these two, we are trying to create engagement for the benefit of both sides. And some of the things that we do in that is that we have, of course, student education. So we teach in the undergraduate, master's, and PhD level programs here at Arizona State University. We have research at all of those levels as well. So we've got research with faculty and our member companies, research with our doctoral students, dissertations, and research in the undergraduate and master's programs. We have executive and professional development. We have a number of events there every year, an institute or mini MBA in services, and our symposium are two big ones. We have other events as well. And then we have, as I mentioned, the corporate members, the partners that help make our center what it is. And as part of our mission, of course, we want to also talk to thought leaders. And today we're going to talk to Charlie Oliver. And Charlie's vita, her resume, reads like that of at least two or more people, really, when I look at that. It's pretty amazing. I'm getting exhausted just looking at that vita. She's doing one cool thing after another. She was at media agencies, BBDO and Condé Nast, two big names in that space. She worked on sitcoms and dramas at major Hollywood studios. She was involved in the Sundance Film Festival. She also was in corporate law at major law firms, and now is doing Art of Talk TV, served Fresh Media, and TECH 2025, and I'm exhausted just reading that. Now, Charlie is recognized as a thought leader in the technology and artificial intelligence space, including by Forbes magazine, and I'm looking forward to her presentation and our discussion. So, Charlie, the floor is yours.
Oh, wow. Well, thank you so much for that amazing introduction. I feel old. You mentioned a lot of great, I do have experience and I've done a lot. I've been very happy and lucky to do some great things and work with great people. And I think as you know, I think our experiences sort of bring us to where we are today. So I'm happy to be here. I hope to share some things with you guys and have a great conversation. So I'm going to just, I'm Charlie Oliver, the founder of TECH 2025, which is a subsidiary of Serve Fresh Media. I'm going to pull up my slides here. Let's see. So sorry. Share. Boom. Let's see. Awesome. Okay. So I'm just going to go through some slides really quickly. What I've come to learn in launching TECH 2025 and discussing it is that I don't like to take for granted that people necessarily understand fully what we do. I think that there are a lot of great organizations who are doing a lot of wonderful things in emerging tech to help people understand what's happening and these changes that are going on in the world right now. I am going to just give you a brief presentation about what it is that we do and why I think it's different and very effective in how we've been able to really help companies and consumers to think through some of the difficult questions that is sort of causing everyone to pull their hair out right now. So again, this is TECH 2025, and TECH 2025 was launched as a subsidiary of Serve Fresh Media, which is Serve Fresh Media is a digital media strategy agency that I launched in 2008. And we, with Serve Fresh Media, help companies to sort of tell their stories. We do branding, marketing, innovation strategy. Love what we do. We do also events, meaning we do event strategy, and we sort of help enterprise companies primarily to tell their stories to their consumers and to their customers through events, through live events. So that's why I have such a strong events background. And when it came to the idea of TECH 2025 initially in 2016, when I had that idea, it was because I kept hearing from our clients at Serve Fresh Media a really I was hearing basically fear in their voices about what was to come, which is the AI technologies, machine learning. I was hearing from C-suite executives, Charlie, what is this? What are we doing? And as I began to get these questions more and more in 2016, I began to realize there's probably going to be a huge gap here that C-suite executives and innovation teams are going to need to understand how to fill. And that's that they don't know what's coming. They don't know how to prepare for it, but they aren't equipped within their own little hub to fully explore and answer the questions of what they need to do. So my question to them was always, well, are you talking to the rest of your organization about this? And of course the answer was no, no, not yet. So the goal with Tech 2025 was to do a number of things, but first and foremost, it was to say to the general public, come in and have these conversations about emerging technologies in a way that I know you are not having them at work or at home. We are now looking at about 9 different emerging technologies that are all sort of percolating together. And if you listen to what many of the developers of the technologies will tell you, they are naturally optimistic, as we tend to be. But if you listen to them, like I did back in 2016, when they're asked the question, well, when are these technologies going to become really mainstream? AI, 3D printing, VR, AR. Most of them were saying, oh, about 5, 6, 7 years. And so when I calculated it, I said, well, we're looking at the year 2025. So that's a little scary when you consider that if even 2 of these technologies sort of are ripe and ready and mainstream in or about the year 2025, that's a major change for our society. That I think it's wonderful, but it's also scary for a lot of people, and we need to prepare people for that. So Tech 2025 serves as an incubator for the general public to come in and, number one, learn about what these technologies are, but in a non-technical way, and then to have conversations about them in a way that includes everyone. Whereas at other tech events in the city, and I'm in New York City, by the way, tech events typically will have a certain type of person in the event as an attendee, and that's usually, people who love technology, who really, really get it. We have the young college students, we have the entrepreneurs, we have people who are technology adapters, early adopters, excuse me. Those are the ones who you will usually see at tech events. Our events were meant to be very inclusive, and the reason for that is because, again, we think it's important in order to understand what to do with these technologies and how to prepare our organizations for them so that they can sort of move the ball forward. You need to have an inclusive conversation. You can't just have managers over there and your software engineers over there. So we immediately were able to begin to sort of draw a crowd that was very diverse. We launched in 2017, January, and we had amazing partners like NYU and other companies and institutions that lent us their time and their doors, opened their doors to us. And so these are photos from sort of some of the events that we've done, especially early on. And the importance of bringing together a diverse room of professionals when you're talking about these technologies that everyone is trying to figure out, is that the ideas that come from this and the questions that come from these types of gatherings are so thought-provoking and surprising to everyone. So we immediately realized that we had something. So just to give you an idea of some of the events that we do think tanks, which is when we have the attendees come in, we open our doors to anyone. Having said that, because we are technical ourselves and we're in New York City and the community here, our audience tends to be 30% technologists, software developers, engineers, coders, wonderful people, and entrepreneurs. We have students, and we also have mid-level managers. We have also baby boomers. So we have very broad sort of socioeconomic, sort of representation of the public, and we love that. And in these events, and this is just a list of some of the events that we've done, in these events we bring on a guest speaker who is obviously someone who's either a practitioner of the technology or more likely a developer, maybe an AI researcher, maybe a researcher in the field. And they come in and they present a particular problem, because we are very problem-based. We believe in presenting a problem, not just a technology, and asking people to solve that problem. That's why it's a think tank. So we've learned early on that, you know, when we bring in the speakers, the first thing that we say to them, and this is very important, and this is what we've learned to, what I myself have learned to say to our corporate clients at Surface Media, how you choose to have the conversation and talk to people about it has everything to do with the results that you get. So everyone in these think tanks has to be challenged. And so we have AI researchers who come in, and the first thing I say to them is, you cannot give a high level talk. Whatever it is that you're used to doing, you have to do probably the exact opposite of that to some degree, and I'll help you do that process. And so it has really been fascinating to watch speakers who are used to giving certain types of talks to certain audiences come in and try to basically challenge themselves. They have to challenge themselves to talk about the technologies to an audience that's extremely diverse. You have to be able to talk to the technologist, and you have to be able to talk to the 75-year-old who's sitting in the corner just sort of curious but has no idea what this is. And believe me, that our events are just that diverse. Having said that, it has been extremely successful. And when we have them come in and talk about these technologies, we present the problem to the audience directly related to the technologies. And these could be problems that are happening that have not yet come about. They could be problems that are inherent in implementing the technologies, or even problems that have suddenly arisen, that, you know, a scandal or something that has happened that everyone is trying to figure out. And we ask people to break up into groups. And when they do, they figure out their problems and they present their solutions back to the attendees, back to the speaker, and the speaker gives them feedback. So there's an honest exchange of ideas in that room that has turned out to be an incredible experience for everyone who comes in. We launched this past year in August, I think it was, yes. We launched Mission AI, which is it's basically artificial intelligence research, where we're teaching people about AI research. This is something that's a very big deal for us, because we feel like it's very important for people to understand this. A lot of what scares people about these technologies is that they really don't understand it and they don't think that they can. But we have learned otherwise in here, in Tech 2025. People know a lot more about these technologies than we think they do. And they actually come up with some pretty smart, brilliant ideas, to the point where our very speakers have said to us, wow, wow, this is really how people are thinking about this. So because I kept hearing that again and again from speakers, which is a shock and a bit of an awe at how differently the general public is thinking about these technologies compared to the way they thought that they were thinking about them, I began to realize that that disconnect needs to be bridged, and we need to kind of figure out how to bring all the stakeholders together. And furthermore, for innovation teams and companies, there needs to be an understanding, even within their own ranks, about what this research is. So ideally, this is also for employees and companies. We go in and we help them. We talk about the latest research. We talk about the research ecosystem, what's going on in AI, who's doing what, why does it matter, how do you keep on top of it, and how do you participate in it. And that has been very helpful as well too. That's been a great program. We do experiential tech tours. We believe in hands-on experiences. We take them to, throughout the city sort of experiences, especially, believe it or not, a lot of our tech tours revolve around art. And I know that sounds a bit kind of, oh boy, but here's the thing. When you get people out of their usual environment and sort of place them around art or something that has them to think differently, it helps them to process the things that they're very uncomfortable with. And we have found that this has been a very, very profound way of getting people to open up about the technologies and getting them to think differently about it. It's been very, very successful for us to have people go out into the city and see the technologies in action. For example, at museums, the reason why we like to send people to museums is because, not just because, oh, this is great art, or this art exhibit is about technology. No, we like them to see how museums are implementing these technologies, because a lot of times these institutions nowadays, anyway, they're being very experimental with technology, and museums are really at the forefront of using, especially VR, AR, those types of technologies. So we encourage we encourage people to go to museums and to watch how other people are engaging with the technology and to experience it for themselves. And so that's been great too. And then we also do webinars, of course, which has been great as well. And the workshops we also do corporate workshops, which is very important as well. A lot of people were coming to us, and we actually had a lot of companies coming to us in the beginning as well, and still saying, can you do workshops for us? Can you talk to our employees about this? And I always say to them that we can do that, but it can't be on your terms. And what that means is that we specifically created Tech 2025 so that it would get the employees out of their environment so that they can have a safe space to talk about these technologies in a way that's going to allow for honest discussion. What we hear from employees, from people who have to go to work the next day after they come to our events, what we hear is a lot. Can't have these conversations at work. What they love about coming into Tech 2025 and into our workshops is that when they come in, they kind of have a safe space to talk about these technologies and to explore them in a way that they are not allowed to do in an office, with their managers around or when they're being watched. And it's I think it's probably obvious, right, that people would feel more comfortable off-site. But when it comes to talking about some of the implications of these technologies, especially the ethical implications of them, which people are not comfortable with talking about, if you give them a safe space to talk about that, the world opens up. And it's actually a fascinating thing to see. So workshops is a big part of what we do. I'm just going to give you two quick examples of the results of these events and why I think they matter, and that will hopefully feed into the conversation and the questions that we're going to have. And we've done 50 events since January 2017, and that's just at Tech 2025. We also do events through Surfresh Media for our corporate clients. But with Tech 2025, that community, we've done 50 events here and in Toronto. And the entire goal of it was always to help people to understand how to ask the right questions about the impact of these technologies, the assumptions, which I've learned that we actually make a lot of assumptions all the time, but the assumptions that we have about these technologies and about how people are going to receive them is actually in a lot of ways holding us back. And I know that I'm sure a lot of people out there know that already and understand that, but it really comes to a head when you ask people to come into a room and talk about these things, or when you see a product that's being released and you realize, whoa, how did they get that wrong, right? So some of the questions that we were asking, and I was at an event last year where I was giving a presentation, and some of the questions that I was asking was like, are we communicating the right messages to our employees and to customers about emerging technologies? Are we listening to them? Are we giving employees the right tools to ask more meaningful questions? The assumption, I think, is that people know how to ask questions, and what we have seen time and time again is that they don't, when it comes to things that they are really nervous about or not necessarily comfortable with. And these technologies are very new to everyone. So it's a very fascinating thing because people, we have found, know a lot more about these technologies than we think they do, but they don't believe that they do. So they don't know how to ask the difficult questions. They're a lot of times put off by it. They're a little defensive or they're a little unsure. But once you crack that wall, you get a wealth of understanding about how they're thinking that pretty much can blow you away. So with these questions, I'll give you an example. I asked these questions at a presentation. How do you gain a sense of stability and direction from the very technologies that are causing the instability to begin with? Are companies open to and prepared for a workforce that is going to be greatly disrupted by automation? Are we asking ourselves the right questions about the technologies that we're implementing? Now, I gave this talk, this little presentation about a year ago. I think it was in the summer. And you'd be surprised to know this, but I actually gave this presentation and asked these questions of a group of professionals in a room, and I expected to get immediate answers back. This was technically a technical conference, a small one nonetheless, but it was a technical conference. And I was shocked when I didn't get any answers. I got sort of blank stares and sort of a little bit of confusion and a little bit of surprise at the fact that I asked these questions. Well, it turns out I was asking these questions of CIOs, software engineers, IT managers, programmers, coders, and developers. These are photos from the people who were actually in the room. Great group of people, very nice, but they were very surprised that I was asking these questions about the technologies, because none of these questions are very technical. But they were questions that needed to be asked. And I immediately walked away from there feeling like I failed, because I thought, wow, I'm asking these questions in the think tank of the general public, and they're getting it and they're loving it. But when I talk to my IT people and I, try to broach this conversation with them, they're not getting it, right? Or they're not receiving it the same way. And that's a big gulf, because both of these people work in organizations together. So I spoke with someone, I did a podcast with this gentleman, John Pavley, who's the Senior Vice President of Software Engineering at Viacom. And we did a podcast called Taming Our Automation. He came on and he said some interesting things about software engineers and IT staffs. And he's been with Viacom for 10 years. He's brilliant. And he basically said that a lot of times the IT staff and the software engineers are not necessarily open to these types of questions, but that doesn't mean that they won't be. It's a process. But we still have to ask the questions, and we have to ask them in different ways, and that there is an automatic and natural pushback, which I have seen in innovation departments helping companies. I know this for a fact. There's sometimes an immediate visceral pushback to the technologies, and that also will dissipate if you know how to handle that. But this can actually hinder innovation more than anything. And it's an inability to understand how to ask questions and how to empower employees to not just ask them, but answer them, right? So one of the things that I learned regarding that was that the most important questions we should be asking ourselves and our employees and our customers is, are we allowing our assumptions about who we are to sort of hinder our innovation? And I have a revised definition of innovation, that we should be focusing on what we need to let go of, which is those assumptions. And that turns out to be a huge thing, because what we have learned in Tech 2025, after doing over 50 events where we talk about emerging technologies with the general public of all ages and socioeconomic status, is that people don't necessarily know how to express their ideas and questions about these things. And then unfortunately, that turns into more of a defensiveness about the technology, or reticence about the technology, than anything else. So I'll give you two examples of that really quickly before I turn this back over. And one example of that is an event that we did about a year ago. It was in December of 2017. And it was, I don't know if you guys remember this, but this was a big news story. Joe Ricketts, who's a billionaire, media billionaire. He actually was the founder of DNA Info, Gothamist, LA Weekly, and other hyper news websites. And I know probably not a lot of you read these publications. Well, in October 2017, he shut down the publications. Had big thing with the journalists. They unionized. He didn't want to deal with unions, and so he cut them off, which is fine. But then about a month later, Civil Media, which is a blockchain journalism platform, launched, and that was launched by Matthew Isles and Daniel Seibert, who is the former head of Google News Lab. We invited Daniel to come into Tech 2025 to give a presentation about Civil Media's blockchain journalism platform, because they pitched the platform as being something that was going to help hyperlocal news platforms, or help the hyperlocal news industry. And seeing as how this story was one that really sort of hit at the gut of people, ordinary people who relied on those hyperlocal news sites, especially in New York City. We love all of these sites. I felt it was a good idea to bring him in to talk about why and how this is something that would help ordinary people who just want to get good news, good local news at a decent price, right? And who want to feel as if they have some sort of control, and how this would help journalists. So this is an example of how we get people to come in and to have these discussions about these technologies in a way that's substantive to them, that's relevant to them. We create a narrative, or take an existing narrative, and we sort of bundle it up with the technology, and we ask them questions about it so that they can see and begin to explore what the impact of the technology will be in their lives on a personal level. So this event was actually packed. It was full of hyperlocal journalists, and Daniel Seiberg, as you see right there from Google, he gave a great presentation, but a funny thing happened. They hated the platform. They hated platform. This is a blockchain platform that was funded by Consensus. The feedback that the audience gave him on that platform was really substantive. The feedback was smart. And I could tell that Daniel was a little surprised by that. You know, he didn't expect that much of a pushback, and I'll be honest with you, we didn't either. But the audience gave such a strong negative pushback. These journalists and these, you know, students, entrepreneurs, they kept asking him why. Why do you need a token? What is this for? Why should we let go of advertisers? What is this, you know? And he couldn't answer all of the questions, and that was fine. We don't have all of the answers, but they asked some pretty smart questions. The next day, I sent them I sent the company an email, and I said to the team at Civil Media, I think you should look into this some more. I think there's a problem here that you need to you know, examine. We transcribed that whole event, and we sent them the transcription and the detailed feedback, and they never addressed it. When they launched the platform, this is Daniel Seiberg's, this is his quote from the event. When they launched the platform, Civil, about 7 months later, an interesting thing happened. They launched the platform, they opened their token sale, and it failed. It failed sort of spectacularly. People just didn't buy the tokens. They didn't get the model. It confused everyone, including the journalists. And when they began to get their feedback from analysts, the feedback was literally the exact same feedback that our audience gave to them 9 months earlier. And so the fascinating thing about this story is that they did not take the feedback of the general public at that time. And this is something that is very, I think, important even to this discussion, is that, you know, if we are going to allow the general public to have a voice, we have to listen to them when they tell us something isn't working. And our audience was very precise and very clear on saying this is not working. And so it was a fascinating sort of case study in watching how this all unfolded. And we ended up getting feedback from these guys afterwards, and they said to us that this was a humbling experience, and they regretted not listening to attendees who said to them, this doesn't work. And going back to the assumptions that we make, they made the assumption that if they put the technology out there, this cool new blockchain technology, and if they brought on some of the greatest partners on the planet, that the general public will buy into it, and they just did not. So that was a fascinating sort of direct correlation between listening to the general public about emerging technologies, ignoring them, and seeing what happens when you do that, when you don't allow them to have a voice in something, or you don't listen to that. Now, on the flip side of that, a couple of months ago, we had this amazing gentleman who's one of our advisors come in. His name is Henry Greenidge, and he's actually the he is the head of East Coast Government and Community for Cruise Automation, and Cruise Automation is a subsidiary of General Motors, and it's their driverless car division. And Henry came in to give a talk about consumer data and, you know, driverless cars. The conversation was specifically about what's going to happen with this incredible amount of consumer data that's going to be gathered in these vehicles. You know, the social media platforms gather a lot of data. These cars are going to gather far more data than these platforms that we call social media. So he came in and gave a great presentation, and we began to ask the audience questions and to do the think tank. And he was so excited by the response. And this is a man who's actually spent years as a policy advisor for Bloomberg and Obama. The response that he received from the audience, from our attendees in our think tank, was so enlightening to him that he's literally said to the audience, we're not even thinking like this at Cruise. We're not thinking like this about the data. You guys are thinking about this very differently. And he began to jot down notes, And he went back to Cruise Automation, and they had meetings apparently all week about it. And they changed his position. They gave him a bigger budget. They created sort of more a mechanism for him to have more outreach and engagement with the community. And they made it so that he could easily engage with communities in a more substantive way than they had before. So that's the flip side of this. This company, which is a General Motors company, they did what the startup, the blockchain startup, didn't do. They listened to the employee, they listened to our audience. And as I said before, the audience actually gave him feedback that literally was so foreign to him that he couldn't believe it. He said, we sit in cruise, we sit here all day and we work on these, autonomous vehicles and we think about this stuff. But they were giving him feedback that he had never even considered. So that's the takeaway that I'll leave on, which is that, companies have to give employees sort of new platforms and experiences through which to ask the questions that they need to ask and to explore it, really honestly explore those questions. We also have to stop leading by old assumptions that no longer work, right? Like the blockchain company, they just assumed that, it'll work out. They'll buy into it no matter what. And that didn't happen. And also the consumers know far more about these technologies and how they should be developed than we give them credit for. Now, I hear that even from my speakers when they come in, because they're always surprised, shocked at how people are thinking about this stuff. So if we give them the platform, they will help us to figure this stuff out. Otherwise, I think it will be to our detriment. So I'm going to leave off on that. And I thank you for giving me this platform is all. So, okay.
Great, thank you, Charlie. And
You're welcome.
I'll restart my video so you can see me again as well.
Okay.
The presentation was wonderful and really brought up a number of topics that are very interesting and are fascinating. And one of them is this whole notion of the fear about AI or tech or robots that you heard from your clients, which is sort of reflected in, I always think of it as two really ends of the same story that we hear, and we only hear those two polar ends. And the one is, so the Elon Musk position where the robots will kill us all. So it's that one extreme on the one end, and then the Davos, the World Economic Forum, it sounds like this will all be just a wonderful Candyland, and this will be wonderful, all these wonderful technologies. There's those two extremes we keep hearing about that maybe play into that as well, and we don't hear much about that middle ground of where, hey, how can this work in a positive way? And that seems in some ways reflected in what you were talking about when you were saying that the folks that come to your events, they seem to be more in that middle ground. They ask questions, they say what works, what doesn't. And whereas the folks, when you were talking to the CIOs in the IT group, they're living in this Candyland place where, like, what do you mean it's not good, right? Or why do you have questions? So this really interesting dichotomy of these two poles that are extreme and that middle ground that I think you're exploring. Does that reflect a little bit of what you experienced?
Absolutely, absolutely. And to be honest with you, in 2016, when I first, thought of this, I was stuck in between those two polars because, to be honest with you, I heard or I read an article that was co-authored by Eric Schmidt and Sebastian Throne. It was co-authored by them in Forbes, and it was basically sort of a rebuttal to Elon Musk and the late Stephen Hawking, who, as you know, they believe the robots are going to come. And Eric Schmidt said, it's going to be wonderful. We're going to have a tech utopia. Everybody's going to be happy and everything. And I was really taken aback by the idea that they should, basically the tone of the article, and they said, relax, it's going to be great. And I thought to myself, well, it will be great for some and not so much for others, right? like you have to consider everything. And then literally 5 months later, the day that Trump won the election in 2016, I was in an event in San Francisco, and it was the event that Mark Zuckerberg spoke at, and I sat 10 feet in front of him, and he said, there's no way that Facebook could have had anything to do with Russian interference or hacking. our platform would never be used for that. And even as he said those words, and I sat in a room full of CEOs of the top companies in the world, you know, we were shocked by the whole election as everyone else was, but that remark was almost as shocking as Trump winning the election, because it sort of represented a belief in the technology, a faith in it, a blind faith in it that simply did not reflect, I guess, what we know people are thinking and feeling. So yeah, it's fascinating. And I'll tell you something, people come in and they actually are scared too. We started seeing a change in how people feel and think about these technologies in late 2017. They started coming to us and they actually were becoming more emotional and more cynical. And in some events, they were very like riled up. But once they worked through that, they asked the smart questions and they gave the smart answers. And the problem is that they don't have a place to work through those questions in corporate America. They're not being asked these hard questions that allow them to work through that initial fear or anger or disgust or whatever. And that's not good.
I mean, it's interesting the example you brought up with the hyperlocal media and sort of the reflection of that belief that, oh, this is awesome technology, everybody will just love it, as opposed to, in some ways, you know, we here at Arizona State University, of course, in the Center for Service Leadership, we grew up in the marketing world. Our faculty, a lot of them are marketing faculty, and so, you know, we always say, well, marketing still applies. There's still customers and they still have needs, desires, fears. They have all kinds of things that we've been studying for decades and decades. And to sort of give another example of that, when I teach in our Master of Analytics program, which is a very technical program and attracts a lot of people with a very technical background. And in there, I teach the marketing analytics class. And part of that, it's hard to do marketing analytics if you don't know marketing. So part of that is I do a mini MBA in marketing, right? And consistently I hear from them that is the part they actually love the most, kind of understanding that picture. And so I have hope that, you know, if you let them and if you kind of push back a little, that they're actually very receptive to that. And, you know, sort of the notion is, how can we do better next time, first time out?
Right.
As
Absolutely. Absolutely. As a matter of fact, the first event that we did was on chatbots. And I love this point that you made, because this underscores what happened at the event and what let us know, okay, we must be on the right track here. This has to be the direction we need to go in. It was on chatbots and we didn't know who would attend. But I figured if we made it about chatbots, which everybody can kind of sort of understand, right? You may not know the technology or be able to develop it, but everybody gets it. 30% of the room, technologists, they develop the technology themselves. The rest of the room, marketers, you know, entrepreneurs, non-technical people. And when we had them do the breakout, the exercise that we gave them was to create a chatbot. So I don't care if you've never done it before, create a chatbot, create a Valentine's Day chatbot and do the conversational flow for the chatbot. And that's the fascinating thing. Our guest speaker was Clara DeSoto, who was the founder of Reply.ai, which turned out to be 2 years later one of the top chatbot developers in the country. And she said to them, create a conversational flow, here are the post-its, go for it. And everybody broke out into groups. I allow them to assemble into groups. I tell them, my joke to them is, find 5 or 6 other people in here you can stand for an hour. And here's the problem. Like, I don't care who you get with this. And here's the problem. And you want to know what happened, to your point, which is amazing. The group that won was led by a marketer. and the winner, we decided the winner based very diplomatically. Everybody raised your hand if you like this group, if you like. So it was done diplomatically. The marketers won. They had no idea how to build the technologies. But to your point again, on the flip side of that, or I shouldn't say the flip side, but to support that even more, we had 2 developers, young guys in their 20s, who emailed me 2 weeks later and said, Charlie, I want to thank you. My partner and I, we are developers of chatbots for brands. We do this for agencies. We have a small startup and we do it in our sleep. We love this. But we sat in your event and we, in our small group, had a 70-year-old man talk to us in a way that taught us about the technology that we have never considered before. He said, we realized that we were writing our conversational flows far too narrow, that we were excluding a lot of the population with how we were thinking about conversations. And because of that conversation with him, we went back and we did two of our projects to be more sort of inclusive and everything. And he taught us how to do that. So that's what you want, ideally, right? You want the non-technical necessary person to sit next to the person who is, and they both learn from each other.
No, that's great. That's a great example, and so I see that in our classes here, in our discussions too, where they are. They don't come in necessarily with the idea, hey, I really want to learn about marketing, about customers and all that. But if you just give them a little glimpse, like maybe sitting in a room with with somebody that they otherwise wouldn't be sitting with, and starting to listen, they are really quick to go, wow, we really need to understand this, and we really need to use this and figure this out. And that's a great example of something else we here at the center talk about, which is that there's a transition coming.
Yes.
What
do you call it? Do you call it the transition? Because everyone has a different name for it. Some people call it the purge. I don't know.
I call it a transition. There's a transition coming.
Okay.
We can help with that, or we can we can throw up our arms and take cover when the robots come. So I think there's what you're doing is wonderful in helping with that transition, figuring out how can we make those transitions work. Just like I always like to say, we were lucky twice in that when we moved from an agricultural society 200 years ago to a more industrial society, there were 95% of people were working in the fields, and it turns out today we have about 2.5% or so. So to produce more than enough food for all of us. So those 93% or so, they're not all sitting now on the unemployment line. There's other things that we have figured out, and the same thing happened in the kind of late 50s and beyond, when we became very productive in the manufacturing side, and we went from somewhere around 40% down to maybe 12%. Again, those are all not just sitting on the unemployment line. We have figured out other things. And so that's where I think your approach and the things we do here at the center are very important to try and figure out how can we make that transition work for everybody, work for the people that are going to go through a very personal shift, as well as for the consumers, as well as for entrepreneurs. And I think your organization and what you're doing is such a wonderful example of trying to make that work in the right way.
I think I can say the same for what you guys are doing very easily. I'm floored by what you do there, and it shouldn't be understated. It's one of the things that I tell our attendees, and I don't get into the habit of lecturing them on anything. I'm not there to lecture you. I'm trying to figure this out myself, right? But I do tell this to clients, and I say this all the time, is that they have to begin to factor in desperation into their models. And I know that sounds a little weird, but we are actually living right now in an era of desperation. And that's not as horrible as it sounds, right? But there is a fact of life today that our old systems are breaking down, right? We don't really understand what's going to come. And the in-between is kind of scary, because, well, then which way do I go? And a lot of times, desperation plays itself out in people's decisions in ways that are obviously very, I would say, surprising, unpredictable, really, really unpredictable. And we have spent the last 50 years sort of servicing each other based on a model of aspiration, right? It's like you have a customer and you just tell them what they should aspire to be. And it's easy. You put that image out there and they'll buy into it, right? And that's the assumption. Well, you put that image out there now, you're likely to get protests from millennials. What do you mean we should have bigger cars or more money? So then what now do you tell customers? You can't go on an aspirational model when we don't know what we should aspire to. We don't even know what we're going to be in 5 years, right? So I don't see that as a horrible thing, but I know that it's something that strikes fear in the hearts of people, and especially executives who have to build products and services for people. So what I tell them is to sort of, you have to factor in desperation, the idea of desperation, and how that drives behavior, and is driving behavior. I mean, you look at what happened with the shutdown that is thankfully over now, right? But it does play into our psyche and our decisions, and in what we want, which now I think is probably more so security than anything else. We want a feeling of security. But, you know, if we don't give people, especially employees, a way to explore these emotions and ideas in ways that they never have before, we really are going to be doing ourselves a disservice. And we see that now in a lot of the products, that a lot of the things that are coming out. I mean, look what happened to Google. Google is the biggest company in the world, and they have made a few big missteps, huge missteps. I mean, the big companies, big tech companies they're going to be fine. They'll be there for a while, but they're faltering now. They're stumbling, and you can begin to see, you can see where the assumptions that they've had about their own employees for the past decade, which has worked for them, is no longer working anymore, right?
Well, that's true. That's very true. That's where when I said we got lucky twice, I was slightly facetious because the luck was self-made in a way. Right. So we did in those two transitions, we had innovations in society, in technology, and in management techniques and tools and understanding. And we need that again. And all those three buckets, we need innovation again to help with this transition. And so I thank you for your wonderful contribution to that conversation. And we're just about out of time for our conversation today. So I want to thank you very much on behalf of the Center for Service Leadership here at Arizona State University. And
thank you for having me.
Also on behalf of myself to continue the conversation with you in the future as well. I'm looking forward to that. So thank you so much for coming on to our webinar.
Thank you so much for having me. This was great. Thank you. You guys do amazing work here.